Associates. And that is located in Oak Ridge. She has over 25 years experience in contracts and procurement, both government and commercial contracts. She is a certified purchasing manager and a certified professional contracts manager. She holds a BS and a Master's of Arts degree in organizational management from Tusculum College and is a multi-award winner. I don't want to take all her time, so with that, please welcome her.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me back again this year. This year's topic is going to be a little more intense, ethics violations and penalties. What is ethics? I'm sure you've probably already had that discussion earlier. I heard you had a class on ethics. It's moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conduct in an activity. What is unethical? Did anybody discuss that? Unethical is when a person's behavior falls outside of what's considered morally right. And there's a lot of that going on in this country, a lot more than I realized, because I found a lot of information when I was doing my research. Our agenda today is common ethics violation, ethics policy and code of conduct, federal regulations, penalties and fines, whistleblowers and hotlines. Does everybody in here have an ethics policy at your work? If you don't have one, does anybody not have one? Everyone has one. That's great. It's very important to have an ethics policy because it tells you what's right and how to conduct yourselves. And companies that don't have them are really in a lot of trouble because if the employees don't know, and sometimes they don't. Okay, the next slide. Is it right? Is it wrong? It depends. Terry and I were just discussing this, basically the same thing. Because he said, you know, a little pencil or ink pen, 10-cent ink pen from a company with their name on it. That's not a big deal. So, but if a company were to give you a $25 golf shirt with their name on it or something of $50 value, that would be wrong. It's better, you know, an ink pen, a pencil, some little small something with the company's logo on it. That's what I've always used as a rule of thumb. And in federal procurement, it's always anything less than $25 with the company logo on it. And going to lunch with a vendor could be considered a violation, especially if you are in negotiations with that vendor. If you are in the middle of a heated contract and you go out to lunch with them, that's definitely a no-no. I mean, you shouldn't go and even pay yourself. But in a situation when you go to lunch with a vendor, if you pay your own meal and it's not in the negotiation time, that could be okay. It's according to your company policies. Okay, there's a section in the common ethics violations is mishandling of funds and resources. And we're going to go over some actual cases that cover these. Improper or fraudulent billing, conflicts of interest, and the cost of corruption. It not only costs you personally, but it also costs the companies. And we're going to go into how that happens. I found this encyclopedia of ethical failures, and there were hundreds and hundreds of cases. But I picked out 3 that I thought would really get your attention. One says, if I help you land a multi-million-dollar contract, will you give me a job? These came from the Department of Defense, Office of General Counsel, Standards of Contract Office. These were 2014, and these are real cases. In this case, there was a person that worked with Human Resources who was negotiating with a customer on a contract, and in the negotiations, he negotiated himself a 6-figure salary with the company, and of course the price of the contract got inflated to cover his salary. Well, a whistleblower blew it all up, and guess what happened? He lost his job. The company retracted the offer for the job, and there he was. And another very similar case, there was one barred from the government contracting. So does anybody understand debarring? Yes, okay. He was debarred, and once you get barred from doing federal contracting, you can't work for the government or a federal contractor. And also forced to pay a $40,000 fine. Guess what happened to the job the company offered him? They pulled it back. So he was out on the street. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. Okay, and here's one. You obviously don't know who I am. This young man goes to a rental agency to rent a car. And everybody knows if you're under 25, they're not gonna rent you a car. Well, Daddy is a bureau director of an agency, and he gets really upset, and he takes his office stationery, writes a scathing letter to the president of this company, and how upset he is over his son, and he uses the agency's postage to mail him the letter. Well, the president of the car company, rental company, was very upset about it, so he writes the head of the agency a letter back in return for this. So this guy, what happened to him was he had to do a 4-hour ethics session and a personal fine for use of official postage. So, you know, don't take your personal into your work area either, because these things can happen. This one, I think, is a little bit funny. Judge, I didn't get anything. What happened was a man was an inspector for an off-rig oil company, and it was federal contracting. It was a government site, and he was saying this equipment didn't meet safety regulations, so he referred the work to his brother-in-law. Well, his brother-in-law, in return, it says, treated the inspector to an evening with a lady of dubious morals. So that was his fate. But when the case was brought to trial, his defense was he didn't receive a thing of value in return for the referral. Well, guess what? The judge didn't bite, and neither did his wife. I thought that was really a good one. Okay, we're going to start with mishandling of funds. This is a local case, an East Tennessee sheriff. He was arrested in April, and he had over a 50-year career in law enforcement. He was even elected judge of his county and did not have a law degree. And since after he was no longer judge, they made it a law in Tennessee that if you are a judge, you must have a law degree. But he was also worked for the TBI. He was a state trooper. And during this 50-year career, there was always these allegations of misconduct and corruption. And on August the 22nd of this year, he was arrested and charged with using inmates. These are going to stick, seems like, because it's not going to court yet, but it looks like it's going to stick. He was using the inmates to do his political signs. He also was bought personal cars for repair so he could sell them, and was having the inmates work on them. So he's profiting this way. It's okay if you take the inmates out and they clean up the streets. That's okay. Or if they're washing the police cars. But if they're doing personal work for you at any time, that's not going to cut it. It's absolutely against the law. And he's also charged with forging a lease on a vehicle title. And guess what else? This is the kicker of all kickers. When you do illegal stuff and you gain money, you should pay taxes on it. So they're getting him for dodging taxes on vehicle sales. And all these date back all the way to 2012. He's facing 7 counts of official misconduct, 1 count of using inmates for personal gain, 1 count of forgery, and 6 counts of tax evasion. Now, I'm sorry, there's a slide I forgot to change, I'm sorry. Okay, this one, I absolutely lived through this. The people that own this company was a small percent owner in the LLC that I was working for. Thankfully, the other members were able to absorb that part and keep us away from this situation. This happened at the Oak Ridge National Lab, and what happened was the CEO, he was getting paid funds in advance. And after the advance, he's supposed to send in the billing, and then he's supposed to reimburse the remainder of the funds back to the government. Well, he didn't want to give the funds back. He wanted to keep them. So he devised a plan with his CEO, who also has another company, for them to build his company, and then they kick money back through the other company. I know it's awful. It's terrible. But this happened right in Oak Ridge in the late 90s. I don't know why people think they can do this stuff and get by with it, especially with the government, because the government keeps amazing records, and they check this stuff, and timesheets were being fraudulently submitted for work that actually was never done. So the CEO was convicted of conspiracy to commit money laundering, theft of government property, which money is government property. And the CEO was convicted of aiding and abetting the money laundering. Okay, the CEO spent 21 months in jail, and cases run concurrently, and then he got a supervised release. Well, the CFO spent 2 years in jail, and they had to pay big fines too. The CEO wound up paying $57,218, and then he had $400 for special assessment, and I really don't know what the special assessment was. The COO was 5 months in jail and 2 years supervised release. Sorry, I missed that. And he had a $2,000 fine, and then he had to pay $10,078 in restitution. So, yeah, be sure your sin will find you out. In the conclusion of the appeal, the government retains sufficient control over the funds to issue the support, a conviction of theft and government property. So it was upheld, and both of them did spend the jail time. But the CEO, the funny thing about him, when I had just started working for this company, hadn't been there very long and did not know all the members. He come through the door, and our doors are locked. We had to open the door and let him in, and we didn't have a receptionist. And I asked him if I could help him. He said, "I own this place," and started strutting back through there. This is the same guy, the CEO. So sometimes leave your ego at home, because it's not going to help you very much. Okay, an organizational conflict of interest. In order to describe this, I have a situation where I worked on another contract, and it was owned by 3 different companies. It was an LLC, and one of the companies owned another small business. Well, he tried to get me and got really mad at me because he wanted me to let this small business bid on a package. Well, because they own that part of that small business, I couldn't do that unless I went to my contracting officer and got approval. So you can get approval in the case of, in the case of a conflict of interest. You have to prove that it's not going to, they're not going to see any of the records or anything to do with it. Excuse me. So anytime that you have a bid that's going out, just be careful of who you're allowing to bid on it, because you need to know who owns the companies, because that's how the organizational conflict of interest happens. And then there's other cases, I put some examples down here, that if it's a close personal friend of someone, they receive a contract, it looks bad. I mean, so you need to be able to bring that out, let people know that that's your friend. You don't need to be dealing with them. They don't, that if they're your friend, you need to make sure that's separate, because the mayor's cousin gets a street repair contract. You got to make sure that's above board. You've got to have all your paperwork done. If in fact you do that, it needs to be disclosed on the front end, because if people finds out later, that's when you get in trouble. And this is a big one that I've seen happen. Sometimes the federal government will ask, because they really don't know exactly what they want. Well, they'll go to an engineering company and ask them to help them write a scope of work. Well, that engineering company that helped write that scope of work cannot bid on that scope of work. There's no way at all they can bid on it. They're just not allowed to. I mean, they can disclose all day long. It's just wrong, because they know what it is and they wrote it, and so therefore they can't do it. And here's the big thing, the cost of corruption. Anytime that there is corruption, somebody's got to pay. Does anybody have any questions? You're awful quiet. Okay. Vendors paying the bribes to seek recover money, inflated prices like the HR person that I told you about, because the company he worked for, they pull the prices up to make them large enough to where that they could recover his salary. So that comes up, the government pays for that. The people who are doing taxpayers, we are the taxpayers. Anytime somebody does something and costs the government money, it's costing us money. Ratepayers, like with the TVA. Guess what? If TVA goes out and awards contracts to folks, and those are not in the best interest of the company, guess who? We, because we're the ratepayers. We pay TVA because TVA provides our electricity. So it's us that suffers, everybody. So that's why we have a duty to make sure that, you know, we see other people doing wrong, we report it. It's very important. And billing for work not performed, that was the O'Arnell case I told you about. They made all those fake invoices and billed the government. And of course it was found out, but how much money did it cost the government to prosecute that case, to go through all those appeals, those attorneys? It's very expensive. Who ate that cost? We did. Taxpayers. It's us that hurts. And in city government, our property taxes that we pay, I mean, city government operates off of taxpayers' money. So we have to be really careful in every situation. Okay, failing to meet contractual standards, reducing quality, and using inferior materials. Using inferior materials can cause, because safety violations. If they use something, if they're building a building, it's not strong enough, it doesn't hold up, a windstorm comes, blows it over, people in it get killed. So it's very expensive. So nobody's really, the only person that's going to gain anything is the person who's doing the wrong, unless they get caught. So that's why all of us need to kind of keep our eyes open. And it's okay, a pen or a pencil, that's not the problem. The problem is the big stuff. And a lot of times it's the politicians we found that are probably the most corrupt, because they're the ones gaining all the money. If you listen to any of the TV stations, this politician got that, that politician got the other. It's a big deal, and we need to be good citizens and report anything we know that's illegal or unethical. And especially in meeting standards, that can happen in a lot of situations where if a corporation is paying their executives a bonus for getting something out quickly, that thing can suffer quality, it can suffer safety, endanger people's lives. That's why it's so important that we stick to the right thing, always do the right thing, and report others who are not. Okay, misallocations, higher expense, lower quality of goods and service and works. It results in loss of public funds, high cost of, and decreased quality. And what can happen is, you guys are on public funds, you're supported by those, right, Terry?
Yes.
And if you go out here and build a housing project with substandard quality products, what's going to happen? You guys are going to get sued.
You bet.
And then, you know, and it could literally shut down organizations, especially somebody that depends on, you know, funding from government and such. And, you know, it's very important that we watch our fellow workers and our friends to make sure they're not doing anything that's illegal. Code of conduct. Everybody told me they had a code of conduct or a ethics policy. Do you do ethics policy annually? Ethics training annually? You know, that's something that's really important, even for an established business, even for established workers. Every year you should at least have maybe an hour where you bring folks in and talk to them about ethics and remind them. It helps to remind folks, because sometimes it gets in the back of our mind. We take off to lunch with a vendor, let them pay for it, and forget all about, you know. So, but if we're getting reminded like annually, and we sign a document saying we did this training, we understand it, it may keep us in a better light, because there are good people who make mistakes. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I've seen, is people having lunch with vendors. I had a situation where we had a huge contract with the government, and one of our subcontractors took some of our engineers out on a boat for an entire day. They had a party and all this good stuff. Well, he got back to our director of procurement and contracts, and he wrote the most stringent ethics policy. We couldn't take an ink pen in that company. And those engineers, I mean, they just ruined it for everybody, because here they were, they're designing all this stuff, and they're giving this guy all this information. I mean, he's got them out there, and they're having a big time, partying, drinking, and of course, the people that suffered were the procurement and contracts folks. We were the ones who had to pay the price. But the engineers, so we need to watch those guys because I don't think that they really thought they were doing anything wrong. I think they just thought they were having fun. So that's why it's important not only to educate our procurement staff, but to also educate our other staff. Anybody who deals with vendors, consultants, contractors, and the outside needs to be trained equally. And that's my opinion. I totally support that, and I believe that, you know, companies would be a lot more successful in keeping this stuff down if they were to do that. Okay, some of the occurrences that are included is employee intimidation. How are employees intimidated? Maybe bullied at work? Try to push buyers into. How many times as a buyer have you been pushed by somebody else to try to use a particular vendor because they like that vendor? Never. Yes, absolutely. It happens all the time. I used to get so frustrated at our safety guy because this real pretty little girl would go out to the plant where our people were. She was a beautiful girl, and she would take them spaghetti like once a month. I found out from Fazoli's, and she would take them cookies out there, and they just loved her. And they got so mad at me because I just wouldn't hand her the work. I'm like, she works for a large business. We have small business subcontracting goals. We have to give other people the opportunity to bid on this. But that guy, he just loved that pretty little girl, and those guys out the plant did too. And so they hated me because I broke their little party up. So guys, don't worry about them being upset with you, because if they are, you're doing your job. Sometimes we have to be the policeman. We have to be the one that says no. We have to be the bad guys. And in those cases, it's okay, be the bad guy. You can do that. I mean, it's another instance was I was working for another company, and we was buying a particular container, a metal container, from a shop who had the design on it. The design was patented. One of our engineers goes over to another shop, and this man provoked him into helping him design a very similar container that was almost, it called it something else, but it's almost identical to this man's container. Somebody came to me, and I was a buyer then, and told me that this had happened. Well, my job is to go straight to my boss, and that's exactly what I did. This guy called me, the engineer, and had a fit. Said, "You caused me to lose my job." I said, "No, you caused you to lose your job. You don't work and get paid to do work for one of our vendors, especially when you're literally stealing somebody else's information to build this." And that was basically what was going on. So I was tasked with dealing directly with this man. He's not in business anymore, but I was sent out to his site to talk to him. And he starts telling me that his wife has a touring group that goes out to New Jersey, whatever that place is, where they gamble. Atlantic City, yes. Atlantic City, and he says, "You can go on that trip free." He said, "I'll take care of that for you." I said, "No," I said, "that's against our company policy." He said, "Not my company policy." I said, "That's unethical." So from that day forward, as long as that man owned that business, I dealt with him. Nobody else did, because he literally wanted to bribe people to get the business. And so sometimes your vendors can be really terrible. Anything they can do to get business, they will do it. Then you have some really good vendors, but it's the bad ones that we have to watch out for. We can't let them corrupt us, because that's what they like to do. So, and safety violations, like I said, executive bonuses sometimes depend on these projects being done in a timely manner or done faster. And if they're done days ahead, they get more money. And a lot of times they sacrifice the safety and the quality to do that, to get it done faster. And sometimes they will use bad materials, inferior materials, in order to make it cheaper. So we have to watch our executives too, because, I mean, some of them are really corrupt, others aren't. There are really good people out there too. There's as many, probably a lot more good people, but that little handful of bad people makes the good people look bad. And then there's time theft. Does anybody understand what that means? Timesheets. Inflating those timesheets, putting down hours they didn't work, taking a day off vacation and not bothering to put in time on vacation on their timesheets. That happens a lot too. And if as payroll folks usually are the ones to keep up with that, but sometimes it helps to double check to make sure that people are doing that correctly. If you take time off, don't get paid, we get paid for it, but not working hours. And also stealing. I remember we had a person one time at another company, thank goodness, who would, around school supply time, we just about had to lock up our stuff because he was going, yeah, he would go in and take big reams of paper out and pens and pencils. And I mean, we literally had to start locking the stuff up because, you know, people do that, they'll carry stuff off. And I know sometimes when you're working on something, you may have a pad and a pen you take home, you bring it back to work. If you're working on something, that's not a big deal, you're bringing it back. You're not taking it off to be sent to school for school supplies. And that happens more than you realize, people that have access. And most people now are locking up their office supplies and silly little things like that. And that's so sad that people would do that. Okay, and also discrimination. Could be gender, race, age, harassment. There's all kinds of different discrimination that falls under ethics because it's unethical to discriminate against someone, regardless of the race, the color, the religion, or any of those reasons. That is absolutely an ethics violation. And, you know, a lot of people wouldn't think that was part of ethics, that was part of the HR. Well, it is part of ethics because it's unethical to do that. Ethics policies support a culture of openness, trust, integrity, moral uprightness. And integrity means doing the right thing when no one is looking. So always, and we all work in these areas. I think like the government, Terry was telling me he worked in agencies that were basically similar to what he's working for now. And I've worked for federal contractors all over the site, no bridge. And what happens is when you work with a lot of different companies like that, everybody knows everybody. And they know if you're ethical or if you're not. And the one thing that we have in this industry is our reputation. And in order to be a successful buyer, we must protect our reputations. That's the most important thing. So the integrity, always do the right thing. Okay. Here's another one. This is a case in Hanford, Washington. This VP, and these are higher up people. This guy was a VP of finance. This came out on August the 18th of this year. He agreed to pay $124,440, but for allegations he received a $40,000 kickback. That sounds a little steep to me. You get $40,000 that costs you $124,000. Does the ends justify the means? I don't think so. I don't think so. Anyway, what he did was he was awarding favorable treatments to subcontractors. He had this one particular subcontractor that he would go out of his way to make sure that they got what they wanted because he was receiving the kickbacks. Now, over a period of time, he may have received more than the $40,000, but the $40,000 is what they got him on. And this company that he was giving it to says improperly obtaining or reward favor treatment to this subsidiary. And I won't say what the name of the company was. Okay, now there's a Tennessee construction company. And he was doing business in Kentucky. And he pleaded guilty on 4 counts, including wire fraud, and admitting to paying a detention center official $80,000. He had promised to pay him $100,000, but he only paid him $80,000 at this time for recommending his company to be awarded the project. Okay, the owner was sentenced to almost 3 years in prison. And, you know, he was trying to get business for his company. And in trying to get business for his company, he goes to jail. It's not worth it. Believe me, it's not worth doing things unethically and illegally, because in the long run, every time, in every case, especially with the federal government or even the local governments, we have auditors that come in. I'm sure you all get auditors quite often, correct? You guys get auditors often, auditing those, and that's why they come in, is to make sure that you are doing the correct thing. and to make sure that we're all doing the correct thing. We've got auditors at my office right now looking at our finances. Okay. Whistleblowers and hotlines. Tennessee comptroller, was he here? Did I see that they was here? The
He
Tennessee
was.
comptroller?
An official from the comptroller's office.
From his
spoke.
office, okay. And that's how you report fraud, waste, and abuse. They're gonna take these slides, they will have them, so you'll have these numbers and website addresses. And also, if you observe an agency director or employee engaging in activity, this came right off the site, illegal, improper, or wasteful, call that number. And with the federal government, we have the Inspector General's office. And we report to the Inspector General. And there was a time that I was doing some subcontracting for a company. And in the processes, we had a subcontractor working for us. It was on a project in Chicago. And the subcontractor, this was in a request for equitable adjustment. They were working outside the scope. So we had to go in and ask for funding to cover it. And in the processes, they had sent in the timesheets and we'd gone through them and everything was set up. Well, then the government contracting officer sent the timesheets back and said, you know, this is unallowable. These things are unallowable. You can't do it. So this same company took the same dates, the same people, and inflated those timesheets. Put hours on there, additional to what was, and thank goodness that I had the good sense to take the old ones and compare them to the new ones, because if my company had have sent those through, our company would have been in trouble, as well as the subcontractor. But as soon as I saw it, I went to the owner and I told him what was going on. And I said, my advice to you, because I'm a subcontractor to him, I'm working for him. My advice to you is to immediately call the Inspector General and explain this in depth, write a letter, get it all down, because his company, and he was a private owner, his company could have lost all their federal contracts, and they live off federal contracts. And if you're ever debarred, they can debar you for life, or they can debar you for 3 years. But if you get debarred for 3 years, do you think you'll ever get a contract back? No, it's almost, I've never heard of anyone getting one back, or nobody wants to deal with them. Nobody wants to work with them because, you know, once they're already convicted, you think, well, they're going to do it again. So they don't want to do that. Does anyone in here have a company email that you can report ethical violations through? That is probably a very strong thing. I would advise that also, to have an email box set up for violations or anything that they can report to the company, things they know that's going on that's improper. That way, because a lot of people are afraid to outright whistleblow. So that's why I recommend to set up a special email address. And when you do your ethics training, give them that email address and say, this is where you can report something. And you can report whatever you want to. You don't go to your work email address and send it in because people will know who it is. You can go set up an anonymous email address out there on Google or whatever and use that to tell exactly, get all the facts in it so they can investigate it. And they will investigate it. That's probably the best thing a company could do. And the last company I worked for had such an email address, and I thought it was really great because, you know, if you see something that's not right, you don't want to be tied to it, you don't want to be a part of it, you're not involved, but you know it's not right, report it. And that will help your companies also. Okay, I think I'm a little short here on time again. Does anybody have any questions? You're a quiet bunch. No?
Great examples.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.